I like the sort of like started really. I wouldn't mind even getting my money back.
Welcome back. I'd like to introduce amazing percussionist, wonderful person. Notably her amazing 100 hours drum solo improvisation that she did in Tasmania recently. So
thank you. Hello everyone, good morning. My name is Chloe Kim and I'm a drummer. I'm also a current casual lecturer in the drum set course at the Sydney Conservatorium of Music, which Dr. Simon Barker and Cameron Undy is also involved in. In 2020, I began my practice-led autoethnographic research, focusing on practicing and performing solo improvised drumming. And that was around a time where COVID-19 really started to impact our lives. And on top of that, I personally had to go through 2 heart surgeries. So I was spending a lot of time in bed thinking, I just want to get out there and do something. How wonderful would it be to not worry about any worldly problems, but immerse myself into drumming, which is what I love the most. And so I did that by contacting the Museum of Old and New Arts in Tasmania, also known as MONA, and asked if they would be interested in having a solo improvised drummer performing for, say, a large number of hours, 100 hours. And I sent through this proposal alongside to my statement. It was 1 page, handwritten, and really differently to my expectation, they said yes. And however, can you do that across 10 days of time? Now, 10 days was way shorter duration than I originally expected. I was going to do it across about a month so that I could be away from the city. However, even before considering if it would be a feasible project or not, I said, yes, I can do that. Just as a constraint and a deadline to work towards to. And so leading up to 100 Hours project, I spent every day at the gym for about an hour or 2 working out. And as I was growing up, because of some of the precautions due to my health, I was never encouraged to do that much of physical exercises. But it really helped my overall well-being, so I became healthier. But it also enhanced my understanding and direct connection of my body and my instrument, which is the drum kit. So in February this year, I was successfully able to execute this 100 hours of performance across 10 days of time. And when I say successfully, by the end of it, I had no physical injury. And most of the time I was in a good spirit, except for this one moment at 81-hour mark. I almost considered never doing solo drumming again. But thankfully that moment has resolved, and now I'm still passionate about solo improvised drumming. So today I just briefly wanted to show you and share some of the pathways that came very clear to me in the moments of performance that helped the management and approaches to this improvisation. And I'm hoping that these moments also contribute to the body of knowledge that we're trying to build together as a community, but also offer insights and a model for the complex nature of solo improvised drumming. Now, the very first pathway that came clear to me was the leadership and the followership of motion and sound. It's really just a fancy way of saying I started to notice these 2 different decision-making I was going for. So one was on the right to you, sound-led motion. And I think we as practitioners are most familiar maybe with this form of approaches, where it's almost like similar to learning in existing music, say jazz standards, where we have a certain idea or music that we are hearing that we want to approach, therefore we train our body. So we let the sound to be the guide for the motion decisions. In the 100 Hours setting, I had 2 types of primary sounds. One was internal, so as I was performing, if I was inspired to perform certain rhythmic phrases or play with the textures of the drum kit, I let that happen. But also, because I was performing outdoors most of the time, there were external surrounding acoustics that was happening, and it was as loud as birds sounds or dogs barking at me, sometimes bees that were flying around me, there were babies, and even there was a construction and garbage truck Now, I had an option of completely treating them as a distracting factor, but because I had 100 hours of time to fill in, and last thing I wanted to do was wasting the time. And my ongoing question as a practitioner was, how can I make the decision in my body and the music to a high quality level? It's not just a touch and let the magic happen. It's what am I doing intentionally and how is it coming across? So with the external sounds especially, I sometimes decided to, yes, disregard it, but also play with it. So almost like considering having a bassist next to me. Sometimes I treated them as my accompanists, so I was getting supported by those sounds, or vice versa, where I was supporting the sound. So I will show you this quick video, and it's from 4 and 15 minutes around mark into the performance, so first day. And there's this truck behind me going and making this white noise, but in pulse, it goes ch, 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 ch. I think when they back off, they make that sound. So I hope you are able to hear that in this video. And first I decide to go with it, later I don't. So here it is. Of many sound-led motion decisions I was making. And in contrast, there was this thing called, well, now I'm calling it, motion-led sound. And again, I can call it as an intentional manipulation of the instrument, meaning simply when I couldn't maintain the level of high concentration mentally, I trusted the beauty of repetition of my body motions, especially on the drum kit, which has such a big size presence. If I were to rely on this one specific motion, for example, and again, I had 100 hours to do this. So as I was trusting the beauty of the repetition, first of all, I didn't have to hesitate or concern or like pressure myself to decide what the next improvisational material should be, but also it would allow me a headspace to listen out for another sound-led motions that I want to do. So for example, if I were to repeat that for say about 5 minutes, I mean, I'm being humble, but I really need the presence of another sound, so I'd go. Then it could develop into another double stroke note. Until it becomes more complex. And then I could latch onto those concepts for another longer duration of time. But I also realized the beauty of this is when motion-led sound and sound-led motions are simultaneously interplay, so they complement each other. And as I was doing that, I also realized, actually, sorry, before we move on, I'll show you one other example of my motion-led sound. This is on the last day, 90 hours mark, and I opened up the hi-hat to unusually long distance and decided to put 2 long chopsticks in them and move my arm up and down, but only thing I was changing was sometimes the speed of the arm movement. And so it was creating different rhythms, different textures, different dynamics. And then I let my left hand on a frame drum to be freely improvised and complement this motion. So this is how it goes. So as I was doing that, I also realized I'm being quite considerate about the balance between technical accuracy on the drum set as well as freedom of exploration, because ultimately it was 100 hours of improvisation. During my research period, I came across to this term. It's a soccer term, and it's called tiki-taka. And simply saying, when 2 or 3 players pass the ball to each other really quickly, it doesn't let the opponent team to steal the ball. And that action is so quick and so accurate that in Korea currently, among the younger generation, there's a joke going around saying, if a group of community, say us, have great jokes that we can pass on to each other really quickly without making the scene awkward, they get called as having a great tiki-taka. So something I tried during my research period was to generate great tiki-taka motion within my body, almost like what Simon was talking about this morning, where he was considering the oscillation between left hand and a right hand. For me, when my right hand was struggling, my left foot could come in and kick in and support, and vice versa. Now, during 100 hours, I also realized the tiki-taka between technical accuracy and freedom to explore has to be constant and supportive. And I also realized that sound-led motion and motion-led sound itself has tiki-taka going on. So there were multiple layers of actions and thinking that was happening. And I also developed these ways of improvising one note at a time, one motion at a time, and one drum at a time. So sometimes I would stick with just the floor tom and explore with just the brushes and explore that. I have a confession, and that is, if I wasn't a drummer, I would have been a psychologist. I've always had a long-term interest in psychology, especially to do with children's psychology. So even until nowadays, I enjoy reading some of the research. And one thing I found was this thing called the influence of the number of toys in the environment on toddlers' play. So I'll quickly read this out. With fewer, so 4 toys, instead of 16 toys, which the other control group had, participants, the toddlers, had fewer incidences of toy play, longer durations of toy play, and played with toys in a greater variety of ways. This suggests that when provided with fewer toys in the environment, toddlers engage in longer periods of play with a single toy, allowing better focus to explore and play more creatively. Now I'm going to read this out one more time, exchanging the word toddler as players, practitioners, play as performance, and toys as an instrument for now. Here we go. With fewer instruments, performers had fewer incidences of instrument play, longer duration of instrument play, and performed with instruments in a greater variety of ways. This suggests that when provided with fewer instruments in the environment, practitioners engage in longer periods of performance with a single instrument, allowing better focus to explore and perform more creatively. So I think I was aiming for this mindset of, also because I had 100 hours of time, I could develop ideas, new concepts, new rhythm, one time at a time, one thing at a time. So that also meant, because my focus was developing throughout the days, towards the end, say day 7, 8, 9, the managers from Mona actually had to stop me from performing. Otherwise, I was going to end the set earlier than I planned to. During the days, my sessions were divided into 4 hours, 3 hours, and 3 hours performance with 1 hour set break to eat and have a quick nap. So as I was continuing, one concept tended to last for, say, about 5 minutes in day 1. then suddenly half an hour and an hour from day 2 onwards, to a level where I could maintain one concert for an hour and 36 minutes. So my approach to these chunks of sessions of performance has changed, where before I was thinking, oh my gosh, how am I going to fill in this 4 hours, to, an hour and a half, 2 sets, I'll be done. 2 hours, one concept. If I do that twice, 4 hours gap filled in. So that's how I was able to approach this specific 100 hours of solo drum performance. Just to finish with, this is also a quick graph, 3-dimensional shape that I came up with during my research period. And it was to just simply explain the iterative interaction between practice and research, documentation, and an output. And I know there are lots of research out there talking about it in different shapes and visualization, but the way I decided to do was to buy toothpicks and styrofoam balls and make a shape of a pyramid. Now, the blue one represents practice, so that can mean individual instrumental practice or practice with different people. The yellow one is the documentation process, which I think is very crucial to what we do. And so I have 100 hours worth of self-filmed video for exact occasions like this, so that I can talk about it with the proof and documentation. And it's a very good way to continue going back to the self-reflection process. Then there's this red one called research. So finding out how other people have done long-form art before. Did they maintain their concentration? Did they physically harm themselves? Were what I was preparing for, as well as training my own body. And now my output was the completion of 100 hours, as well as recorded album, which I did on Wednesday this week, by the way, so it's coming out soon. And some of the new ideas, rhythms, concept, embodied knowledge. And what is connecting all those is the bigger picture, the process of practice, the process of high concentration moments of executing the ideas. And so, as well, the arrows from outside is input. So having great community, having support, learning from great mentors is an ongoing shape which can form this 3-dimensional. Otherwise, I trust that the music will stay linear, where we don't find interest in as much. Now, once this 3-dimensional gets shaped, it can be developed into the diamond shape as well, because one process can create more than one output. But then, the combinations of pyramids and the diamonds will create this nonsense shape, which can be represented as visualization, the musicianship of one practitioner researcher. And but I tried to make a spear shape originally, because in the old Egyptian mathematics, there's a way of creating the spear shape by using a very thin, small diamond shape. So I attempted, but because I was using toothpicks and styrofoam balls, I failed. But I rather created this, but I thought this actually represents what we do. We're not playing existing music or someone else's music. We are creating new ideas and new sounds from the scratch. So therefore, everyone's shape of the musicianship will be different. And depends on the audience, it can be viewed in different ways. So I'm so grateful that 100 hours of performance allowed me new ways, new pathways to think and arrange my thoughts this way. And that's all the time I have got. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Chloe. That was fascinating. And to me, as I was listening to you talk, I was thinking about Simon's talk, where these kind of endurance exercises and these exercises of endurance within an environment prompt you to rethink assumptions about yourself, about playing, about music, and about your relationship to the environment, and that prompts new creative possibilities, right?
Yes.
And so I think this is something we should all think about doing, something like this, you know? Yeah, and so many of the things you said just resonated with the things that I like to think about in embodied cognition and ecological psychology. Yeah, really fascinating. Questions for Chloe? Yeah.
Very inspiring. Congratulations on what incredible presentation. Have you ever heard of Buckminster Fuller?
No.
Because you're doing the tetrahedron.
Yep.
It's not actually a pyramid. And it's actually inherently four-dimensional, as Buckminster Fuller states it. And actually some of the designs and interactions of a tetrahedron are incredible, and actually probably the most accurate mathematical view of how the universe actually works. And I think you might be fascinated by Buckminster Fuller's work in doing these kind of perspectives and seeing how things interact. Yeah. We talk about it later.
Yes.
Yeah.
Chloe, great. How did you prepare? I mean, you talked about preparing physically. How did you prepare mentally for it? And what's going on with the mental games? Like, was it the sound? Like, that's a great the image of that. But that was how was all that going?
I don't think I spent as much time preparing mentally, because the weakness that I felt was physical. But one thing I did was telling all my friends about it, and by doing that I thought, well, I can't not do it anymore. Yeah, I have to make it somehow. So yeah, that's, I think, why it prompted the creation of motion-led sounds, because when I couldn't handle it here, I could at least continue fill-upping the hours with this. But also, yeah, like I mentioned earlier, I didn't want to just do it. I still wanted to create this techniques that I've spent 4 years every day morning, 7 a.m. to 10 a.m. in front of a mirror in a practice room at the con. There's this technique I do. I wanted to continue creating that while relying on the repetition of body motion in order to deal with the mental, yeah.
Sorry, can I just ask one
Yes.
more question? Like, you were thinking about this stuff, but were there other kind of, you don't have to get too personal, but it's like, were there friends you were thinking about? What, like, it's a long time to be there. Were there things that, you know, how, you know?
Well, there were two primary experiences I had. One was just hearing this imaginative sounds that wasn't there physically, but definitely because of the overtones and the harmonies from the cymbals also, I sometimes had these weird experiences where someone was talking to me, but no one was around me. And I thought, this is why the rituals are using drums and cymbals, because, you know, I think Jeremy will talk about this as well later today. This is why I'm experiencing, in a way, spiritual experiences. But also there was that 81-hour mark, the one that I had the worst musical crisis ever. Somehow the low sounds of my floor tom and the rack tom at that time really resembled with the sound of a bass by Jonathan Schwartz, based in Sydney. And around the time I was playing a lot with him. And suddenly when I was doing that, I was like, whoa, this sounds like Jonathan's sound. And then I said, well, if I can't handle this, at least my friend will support me. So I almost pretended that sounds are getting played by Jonathan. And then it was, I can still sing the specific note. It's dum, 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 dum. And then I responded. I imagined that happening, sometimes in a silence. Responded, drumming. And then sometimes I pretended to be him, so I went boom, 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 boom. And then I got away from that weird zone of thinking, which took me about 20 minutes, but it felt like a whole day of struggle. But yes.
Excellent.
Hey, Chloe, great presentation, thanks. Yeah, I'm interested in how much ideation did you have before approaching each set? Did you have a kind of an imaginary set list of musical ideas that you were going to explore, and how often did you find yourself repeating yourself and trying to react against or with that?
I don't think I had very specific set lists ever. I did have, because if in the morning I was playing too much of a low sound, my ears were organically requiring some high-pitched sounds. So I knew I was going to avoid low-sounding orchestration in the kit. I think that's how I worked. Sometimes I was so happy with the meal choices that after the break I felt more energized physically. So I could play really fast to begin with and then go from there. Or vice versa, if it was in the morning, I was a bit more chill and meditative. So in a way, that was my set list.
And did you experience kind of any out-of-body immersive states during such a marathon event?
No, not really. I think the closer experience was hearing those fake sounds, just going, whoa. But that was it, not out-of-body experience. No. Yeah.
Two little questions. Lovely talk. Thank you very much. How often did you find that the external environmental sounds that you noticed or chose to respond to induced a kind of timbral or textural response as opposed to a rhythmic one? That was number one. And number two was the stick things you're showing. They look nice. I can imagine them being informative. Are they arbitrary, or did you find a logical, deterministic way of putting them together?
Answer to the first question, I think it was half-half, especially when the external sound was very rhythmic, like that garbage truck. I tended to go with the rhythmic choices, pulse choices, where if it was more of a sound of a baby crying, that gave me an idea to just react to it. I almost wanted to comfort them by playing a service bell that was on the snare drum. So it was very textural approach as well. Answer to the second question, no, I improvised that as well. And my housemates at that time thought I changed my major to doing atom scientific study. But because, like I said, I failed to make a spear, but in a way, even that physical moment, I approached it in an improviser perspective, where I thought, it's okay, I'll improvise with it and see what happens. At least, if anything, I'll have a quick break from writing thesis to do something with my fingers. And when I came up with it, I just found a way to talk about it, because it also still made sense to me very clearly that it itself represents what I do.
Might be interesting as well, developing a procedure for making them. That might be instructive or suggestive for music making too, perhaps.
Yes, I considered that. Thank you very much.
Okay, I think this is the last presentation for this room for the moment. So we're going to hang out and then I'll see you at lunch. Thanks again to Chloe.
Thank you very much.